Bonjour.
Good morning and welcome to these 20th Rencontres économiques, DEX. They're virtual meetings this year because of the health crisis, so we are here at Radio France in Paris. And we thank them for having us. And we're going to discuss this morning a very topical subject because the main topic this year for the meeting is how can we tackle disruptions in the world. So we are going to talk about how can we make AI a tool for progress. Of course, AI is everywhere. It's in our pocket and smartphones. It's in American blockbusters, Terminator, but it's also, more practically speaking, all the mass of data, billions and billions worth of data about ourselves that we leave behind. And it's also about tackling all the questions that it raises in the industry, but also in our private lives. To tackle these issues, we have four experts. But first, let me introduce Dominique ROUX. He is a professor at the Dauphine University in Paris as an economist. Here we have in the studio Thibault LANXADE. He's the CEO of Jouve. Jouve is a company specialized in data analysis. We should have amongst us, even though he hasn't joined us yet, Luc Julia is the creator of Siri, voice recognition app, the system that we all have in our smartphones. I shouldn't advertise for that. And he should be on a web link with us. We also have Ms. Yuko HARAYAMA, who used to sit on the scientific council of the Japanese government, and she currently works for RIKEN. And finally, Jeff FENG. He's currently CEO of Cloudpick, a Chinese company. And lastly, Matthieu COURTECUISSE is the Director General of the consultancy SIA Partners that specializes in AI. He wrote a book called AI Doesn't Exist, so I hope he can explain that title. Thibault LANXADE, you also wrote a couple of books, and you discussed in these books topics that we're going to come back to, a number of fields on which AI has an impact. So, Dominique ROUX, first, by way of introduction, what are the main questions that AI raises? Well, as a member of the Cercle des économistes, my job here is to give you some general views on our topic today. So maybe I'll make the most of these couple of minutes to tell you a few things that will be familiar to some and new to others. Of course, a lot of what we discuss around this table will be things that we know. AI is not simply a technology. In a word, it's not progress in the familiar sense of the term, because AI, artificial intelligence, raises questions that are essential questions about the future and the future of humans. It represents a set of technologies that make it possible to offer solutions that imitate, replace, or assist humans in the acquisition of knowledge. It is no longer a myth. It is a reality. It is a science, the objective of which is to carry out tasks that humans used to fulfill by using their intelligence. Whereas IT is about data processing, where artificial intelligence looks at all cases where processing cannot be only down to a simple methodology, a series of operations that are well-defined and can be executed by a computer, and that make it possible to get to a solution, a result in a reasonable time. AI will probably transform humanity and its industrial use has already started, as we shall say in a few minutes. It is all-pervasive in an increasingly digital world, and it impacts all sectors. Having said that, AI is both a concept and a subject of controversy. So, by simplifying a bit, we can say that it's based on three pillars. It is a field of IT that brings together several building blocks, and including algorithm. It is about a human-machine interaction, and for a majority of French people, AI is a known concept, and for 57% of French people, it is a source of progress, even if 49% of French people say they are concerned about AI. As with any technology, it is neither good nor bad in itself. It depends on the use you make of it, which is why you have to remain watchful. Artificial intelligence is now at the heart of our daily life, but it's not technology similar to any technology. It raises essential questions about the future of human societies, and that is why it is essential to respect a few principles. That progress should always be controlled by humans. They should be ready for cyber attacks. There should be transparency. There should be protection of private data. And it should be a tool that does not discriminate against any person because of the color of their skin or their views or ethnic origin. 40% of startup companies in AI are American, North American, 11% are Chinese, and Israel ranks third. Those top three countries account for 60% of AI startup. France ranks seventh. 15,000 patents in the US. They are in a leading position for three reasons. They have top-notch universities, an economic system that is conducive because of the GAFA that are pushing the others, and investments that are in millions of or billions of dollars. We invest 6 times less than the US, and there's also the necessary cooperation between countries. China has recently shared its roadmap. They want to create an industry around AI that is worth $150 billion. So there are consequences of AI to it has already changed the way we make decisions. It might also impact jobs. So there is a strong possibility that 120 million working people might see their jobs disappear. Simultaneously, millions of people will have to retrain, which causes, of course, problems or at least challenges for companies which will have to help their labor force evolve. But simultaneously, other jobs will be created, making the most of soft skills as opposed to hard skills. And it will also make it possible to free a lot of workers and employees from repetitive tasks and have them focus on more value-added tasks that require creativity and problem-solving skills with greater potential. And I won't say much more, except that in the future, there will be the challenge of deep learning, that is using machines that will teach computers what humans alone used to be able to apprehend. So in a nutshell, we can say that a new world order is taking shape. And I will borrow the words of Vladimir Putin. He said recently the country that will become the leader in AI will be able to rule the world. So competition has already started. The 2017 Chinese plan is geared towards becoming the #1. Of course, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent already collect masses of data. And there's already also the Russian tank that is fully automated. So a new world is taking shape, and AI will no doubt be at the heart of our daily lives. It will bring enhanced efficiency in all its shapes and forms, but we'll have to be careful not to minimize the role of humans, make sure that we do not come up with or move towards a diminished rather than augmented human, which is at the core of the topic of this conference as a whole, which is to tackle the disruptions in the world. So is AI a technology like any other, or is it a complete break? What international strategy could we think of? What could be the impact on jobs? Here are a few ideas that I'm just floating for our experts to tackle here around this table and in Japan or China. Thank you, Dominique, for this very clear presentation. Well, maybe we can start with Matthieu COURTECUISSE. Maybe we can start with talking about the acceleration of that technology and that dream. Could AI be a solution faced with a number of disruptions in our world? That's my question. What do you think? Well, the topic of our session is how can we make AI a tool for progress? Well, I would say that it's already a tool for progress. I would say the real question is what are the conditions so that it stays a tool for progress? I would like to quote Isaac Asimov. He said, "I'm not afraid of computers. I'm afraid we might not have enough computers." So I don't fear that there might be too much AI, actually. Then the problem is that a lot of people have been saying a lot of stupid things. If we look at the health crisis we're in the midst of, some people are surprised that we invest billions of dollars in AI and yet we still die. So some charlatans have bandied about the idea that AI would actually make us immortal. Well, that's nonsense. So there are myths, there's a lot of science fiction, and in the health crisis that we've gone through, what has AI contributed? Because the reality is that the health crisis, as we've experienced it, and lockdown, the way we've experienced it, would not have been possible without AI. Governments would not have been able to decide the lockdown and save so many lives without AI. Why? Because we've been able to maintain certain resilience of the economy thanks to working from home. And we've used augmented reality to carry out maintenance on certain sites. And some people have seen how useful e-commerce was. There are limitations, of course, but there have been disruptions. And we've also went overnight to a cashless economy. And we've been able to sequence the genome of the virus in a matter of days. All of the studies could be done very quickly thanks to digital contact tracing tools has been developed in Asia in particular. Being able to recalculate GDP so as to make economic decisions, that would not have been possible without our capacity to compute all those data sets. So much has happened. Of course, there have been darker things such as cyber attacks, but we would not have been able to do that even 10 years ago. So progress is already underway. Of course, we have been frustrated with some of the tools that were not up to the task. Thinking of the Stop COVID app in France. In other countries, the apps have worked fine, but over the last 20 years, we've been looking at solutions in the field of health, and technology is ready. There's a lot that's already possible in terms of medical imaging, in terms of making it possible for physicians to be assisted by machines. There are also certain tasks that are carried out by nurses that could be carried out by automatons. Also looking at enzymes and mutants and a number of calculations and to fight against possible bioterrorist attacks. So a lot is already possible, but there are blockages some are psychological, and I think these blockages will have to be lifted, and there will be progress. Why were there those stumbling blocks or reluctance? Because it affects our privacy. We mentioned the Stop COVID app in France. Might be that it doesn't work because there's a certain reluctance or distrust in some countries. So there is distrust towards these technologies, even though they progress and people see these technologies in their daily lives. So the question is, how can we make sure that AI remains a tool for progress? Because there's a number of problems that we need to raise. Dominique mentioned it. The economic impact is huge. There's a powerful redistribution of wealth that is underway, and you can't deny that. Tech actually over the last 10 years has gone from 5 to 10% and of world GDP, and it will soon account for 20% of GDP. But I'm thinking of mobility, of remote payments. So the reality is that the wealth that is created and transferred is still concentrated on limited areas and limited number of people. So I'm coming back to the charlatans that have been banding about funny ideas. 5 years ago, we had already seen fearmongers saying that jobs would disappear and it would be chaos. Well, actually, it had been predicted already years ago, and it never happened. So some people like to be fearmongers. There are real concerns and real fears that we shouldn't ignore, that we should address. Access to tools is also an issue. Access to the production of these tools. We have to rethink a number of training programs. We have to put maths back at the core of the skills that should be enhanced. Actually, mathematics more than code, because coding all changes all the time. But we need to redevelop a society that loves science and maths, and that's very important. And there's a lot of initiatives underway. There's a question of adoption also, so that all businesses and everybody can benefit from it. There's a number of initiatives that already exist that make it possible to tackle that. There's also the question of regulation, because one of the specificities of AI, is that it impacts our privacy. There should be regulation, and the forthcoming decade will have to be steered towards regulation. So let me name a few. How do we collect data? How do we store data? How do we manage proprietary attributes, traceability of data storage? How do we explain algorithms? All of these subjects are in the hands of regulators, and there are some other issues such as human trafficking, copyrights, and there's also an issue of making all these regulations accessible to countries. So you see that there's a long and rich agenda, and of course this is against the backdrop of world competition, and there's a difference in development from one country to another. So we have to be careful with the asymmetry in regulation. So in the non-democratic countries, there is no popular consultation or popular debate, whereas in democratic countries there is a public debate. And there's also the problem of CO2 emissions linked to blockchain, smart contracts, and IoT, the problem of recharging batteries in a number of applications. So that's another issue. And I think major tech players, Microsoft is aiming at -30% of carbon footprint by 2050. Amazon has announced recently that it would be carbon neutral by 2040. So that's a real subject, a real issue, because climate change is part of the disruptions.
Thank you for this exhaustive presentation. So before reaching out to our foreign correspondents, Mr. LANXADE, just one reaction. Our AI, which I would rather call, auxiliary intelligence, it is here to help man. Is it artificial? Well, it is the automation dimension and decision-making support, which is actually made easier. But then the issue of regulation, harmonization of rules. Otherwise, it could be, the new Far West with the fears. So what I see on a daily basis, the way we are working on this AI in our company, it works mainly with the issue of data. That is data, which is complex, multiple. We try to aggregate in order to provide some services and usefulness. This issue problematic has to be regulated, then the choices are amazing today. And to work on this regulation and on this acceleration is a true challenge. That has been very well explained, at least the main aspects. It is a concern we should keep in mind on a daily basis. Now, regulation. Well, there will be the norm and there will be the law. For the last 10 years, over 10 years, the civil code, labor code, or labor law, and even the rural law are being influenced by GAFAM, by this digital power that be, which places us in a very defensive position. And the GGRP, it respond to this regulation, and other countries are thinking about this, or and it's interesting to see the position of the US. But we will. We'll deal with this and citizen protection through norms. That is the choice, the will of our politicians. Another topic in this regulation is the ability to organize infrastructures and to control infrastructures. Even though some countries are not following this way, but states should organize meta platforms, and we see today that the European dimension, this is highly complex. We saw it again a few weeks ago when we wanted to create the Stop COVID. Europe was not able to produce or to come up with a solution that would apply to all or would be usable by all European citizens. So the meta platform is the ability to be to be the platform or platforms to receive all AI solutions by controlling them, referencing them, and that would make it possible for administrations, for companies to use them to seek solutions that are compatible and useful for our daily activities. So this meta platform, which already does not exist in France, it cannot structure itself from a European at the European level, and we are in a, we are in no position to fight against the Chinese or US, overpower, because these countries are implementing highly efficient systems, and they can therefore move forward and be in a position of dominance. Now, third point concerning regulation is the human guarantee we'll have to provide, and this human guarantee does not exist today. It does not play its role as a sort of a barrier or monitor or control system. So we don't deal with the conventional regulators we have in our countries, for example, regulators who structure and frame the market. I think companies, economic players, and administrations will have to provide human guarantees, which could be, you know, a third of confidence, or and control this data. So, even though there are many fields, you know, we are just at the we're just at the beginning, because we need the data which should make it possible to go further and stronger in the ability to cure disease or to help patients. The challenge of digitalization of data, the existing data, it's a real challenge too. When we look at French hospitals, for example, there is a huge amount of data, you know, a wealth, an amazing wealth of data, but it is I think it's something like 300 kilometers of patient files, solid files. So this digitalization project is huge. And considering the current situation of our hospitals, I think to digitalize all the files of our Paris hospital, I think it would be over €1 billion. Some major US players are getting position on this market and would be ready to do it almost for free in order to gain access to this data or this set of data, and this is essential. So the ability to control data is another key element. We were discussing it. One of the problems of AI we face, especially in the healthcare system, is the ability to justify what is going on within the healthcare programs. In some Asian countries, cancer is well dealt with correctly. And then we have to define a protocol, because the machine will integrate so many data that the doctor is losing control, you know. And the protocols, therefore medical protocols now are based on machine calculation. So human guarantee will be very complex in this domain, considering the fact that humans will not do calculation again to make sure that protocols are reliable and comply with patient health requirement. So it's a huge field of development, and the human guarantee, in my opinion, is what will be at stake in the next decade, to make sure that there will be a skill or competence increase or ramping up. We need to train people so that they can understand, regulate with normative rules that will make it possible to master the data. Well, machine can be adapted to man, or man can be adapted to machines. Well, now to discuss it now with our guest overseas. So, Yuko HARAYAMA, are you online? Yes. Good morning. As I said, you work for the Japanese government in science, and you are today in charge of international research for the RIKEN Institute. You're a scientist, madam. On all these issues, you heard the discussion. We're trying to set the framework. You're an expert. Do you think that today the machine will adapt itself to man, or will man adapt himself to the machine? In view of the dramatic, spectacular progress or advances made in all domains, from industrial production to healthcare. So what are the promises of AI, and how can we control it? I followed very closely what was said. Let me come back to some points. AI is not a robot. It doesn't need a physical aspect as they do in sci-fi films. AI is everywhere in our daily life. If you consider several applications and services which are becoming more and more sophisticated, often we're not aware of it, but we use them. So, for example, you know, there are recommendations. You know, even there is also even some very intimate choices may be AI guided. So if I could summarize, I said that we use AI in an unconscious manner. It's very pleasant, actually, and therefore habits become almost you know, and you tend to become passive rather than active because of all those additives. Is it a progress? Well, possibly, if we consider that there are more efficiency, less conflicts, and many positive aspects. But the question we ask ourselves is that, do we always act as a player? Are there risks to be under the control of the machine and data, the issue of data, you know, confidentiality of data, privacy, you know, influences concerning your relations with other individuals or objects or companies. Now, once they've been used, are they being destroyed as they claim? We're not certain about that. So the development of AI, it is a necessity. If you consider a crisis such as the COVID, for example, of course, AI did help. And we could not have achieved some of the results without the AI. So it is very difficult to have a global view and to have a sort of a clear-cut opinion. But anyway, as was said, we have to remain vigilant. And as a consumer, we have to be informed, aware, and demanding. So I would say, in another scope, AI is becoming preponderant, which is it helps science make progress, of course, and I could summarize it just a few words. First, it's a small phenomenon, epiphenomenon. Well, in terms of research, for example, and we can formulate a hypothesis. And you know, hypotheses are not necessarily facts, but we just we move on forward step by step. So we must formulate a hypothesis. We base this on existing works, and we compare this with similar situations and to find similarities or contradictions. This is what the researchers should, and it is the added value of researchers. But now, we cannot say it's the past. It is still the fact, it's still the method, but another way to formulate hypotheses are becoming a fact. We get the data, we try to analyze data with AI, you know, trying to define, you know, elements, hypotheses, and then make it ask the machine to come up with possible hypotheses, and then, as a researcher, try to see which is the most relevant hypothesis while giving it a scientific basis or background. So it's a complementarity between AI and researchers, but again, many challenges remain. We have to be attentive, vigilant, but we, again, to be an informed consumer, user, and very demanding as to transparency and privacy. And we want to make sure that the results of the power of AI remains under democratic control. These are my views. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We'll get back to you in a couple of minutes. I don't know if Jeff Frank is with us. Jeff Feng from Cloudpick. Mr. Feng, hello. You work for a group called Cloudpick, specialized in AI. And we talked about this geopolitical dimension and democratic challenges raised by AI, like facial recognition or enhanced imaging. China is working strongly on that. Could have has a political system that allows for it, but in Europe, this is more of a challenge, even though facial recognition applied to safety, of course, social safety could be an issue. So, what is your view? What are your views, and how do you? What is your opinion about the human improvements provided by AI? And still in this discussion we've started since the beginning. Now, what should we do to control it and make sure it does not become a danger? We mentioned, will man become lazy because of too much help? Stupid, possibly, and pass on control, drift into a dependency to machines. So we have to be attentive, we have to be vigilant. You have the floor, sir.
Allez-y. Ah. Aïe. Qu'est-ce qu'on fait dans ce cas-là?
Sir, we cannot hear you in France. Is your microphone on?
Est-ce que les auditeurs le reçoivent ou moins ou...
Chinois.
Pas sûr. Bon, alors peut-être on va couper Monsieur Feng et essayer de voir si vous pouvez rétablir la liaison avec lui. Est-ce que Luc Julia est parmi nous?
Is Luc Julia with us? Or is not here yet? Oh, yeah. Hello. Okay. Sorry about this little snag. We'll try to solve the problem, Mr. Feng. So, as I was saying, you're the father of Siri. Siri is vocal recognition to do faster research on the internet, and especially on our smartphones. Today, you work for the Samsung group. You are in charge of innovation. Did you hear all the previous speakers' discussion on AI? No, you wrote a book which says AI does not exist. And in this case, what's left? What could we say? Especially this idea that it is an auxiliary, or it's a support system, that it should not, we should not be over-fearing this technology, but be aware of some of the problems. Now, do you see the situation today? Because you are at the heart of the machine. So do you see the improvements, and especially in the period we're experiencing, and the threats, of course, that we have to be aware of? If I wrote that book, AI does not exist, it's simply to avoid talking about to tell the truth about AI. Mr. COURTECUISSE defined very well the situation, so I won't go back to it, but it's not sci-fi, it's not RoboCop, it's not Her. The movie. Artificial intelligence is many tools, very powerful tools that we invented, that we developed, and like any other tools, very much like a hammer, we're holding the handle. That is, you know, we've told, yeah, of course, we need regulation to regulate where we have the handle, so we will do whatever we want with this, but still, to do what we want with artificial intelligence, we have to understand the tool. So the key here for mankind, for us, human beings, for us to be able to really explain to our politicians what the situation is, and you know, the key is education. Therefore, we need education. And another speaker, Mr. COURTECUISSE, said that what's essential is mathematics, not the code. Yes, of course, AI today are purely mathematics. So if we want to understand AI, we have to understand mathematics. Now, we need education. By educating, we'll understand the power of the tool, because such tools are amazingly powerful. Then we can do just about anything with them, you know, like any tool, you know, like a hammer. I can, you know, drive in a nail, but I can use it to hit my neighbor, you know, over the head. And we said that it's not nice to hit the neighbor with a hammer. So we'll have to decide on what should be done, what should be done and not done with AI. We have the key, we have the possibility to do it, but we need to give ourselves the means to understand, to master, and to educate the mass. So a couple of points about the jobs and the fact that AI will replace us. So AI replace some of our jobs.
Repetitive tasks that we mentioned before, so I'm not going to repeat it. But I think AI will create new jobs as well. I'm convinced of that. Of course, we can't put figures on that. You know, when it is said 80% of the jobs that exist today will not exist come 2030, Well, sorry, 80% of jobs that will exist in 2030 do not exist yet. Well, those are just figures, but yes, a lot of jobs that will exist in 2030 do not exist now. But it is up to us to decide what we will let machines do. And there's a number of things that machines won't be able to do because it's all based on mathematics and on algorithms. And algorithms are built by humans. And sometimes we do it wrong. And it could also be AI that checks on algorithms. But so you talked about the importance to be able to explain algorithms. It's very important because if you can't explain it, it becomes a black box. It becomes magic, and magic fuels delusions, the fantasies that are completely wrong. AI is not the same as intelligence. So I would talk about augmented intelligence. I would talk of artificial intelligences, and I would talk about our intelligence being augmented by these tools, the same as hammers were very useful for us to put nails. So we can talk about health, we can talk about transport. These are some of the fields that can be improved. And driverless cars, the driverless cars that could do better than a human driving a car do not exist yet. But a driverless car level 4 will be better than us, will make it possible to avoid a lot of accidents. So I don't know how many people die on the road in France, but let's say that if there are 5,000 people who die on French roads, well, we could probably avoid a big chunk of that death toll. So AI and all its applications will get close to perfection, but it will come at a cost. And all the energy used by artificial intelligence today is absolutely unsustainable and unbearable. So we have to be clear on this. Deep learning uses so much data, which means that it uses a huge capacity of servers. So you remember the machine that won against the world champion, the world Go champion? Well, that required over 4,000 kilowatts. So 20,000 times more than your brain just to play Go. And bearing in mind that your brain is capable of doing a lot more than playing Go. So we have to be careful not to push for these artificial intelligence applications to use a lot of energy. Right. I had another question for you, and then we'll move on with the rest of the discussion. Who will be in charge of that international governance? There's a lot of talk about that. Will it be under the aegis of the UN? What could be the framework? Because Dominique said that there is competition, industrial competition worldwide. China wants to be the leader. They invest a lot, but the US are also a step ahead. There's the big tech that the GAFA or their Chinese equivalent, the BATX or Matthieu, that have benefited from the crisis. So how can we come up with an AI code? Who could be in charge of making sure that we have that code of ethics? You mentioned a number of issues. We saw that some AI tools could develop biases, sexist or racist biases. So how can we make sure that it stays within the control of mankind? Well, as the lady said, Ms. Harayama, we are the users, and we should be informed. So we need to educate ourselves. Yet again, there would be a need for education. So we talked of democracies. I am convinced, and maybe I'm a utopian, but if we are able to get people to understand the challenges and what's at stake, that educated general public will educate our regulatory authorities, our governments worldwide, and that education will make it possible to make the right decisions and the right choices. Some countries are less democratic than others. That do not share choices and decisions with their people as much as others. But I am truly convinced that it's a matter of education. Do we have Mr. Feng on the line, and can we hear him? Over to you, Mr. Feng.
Est-ce que désormais la régie peut m'assurer que ça marche? Je crains que... Si vous pouvez essayer, allez-y. Pouvez-vous parler, Monsieur Feng?
Hello.
Allez-y.
Hello. I can hear myself.
On vous entend en anglais, mais je ne sais pas si vous pouvez... So, could you tell us a little more about the regulation of AI?
So could you tell us a bit more about AI regulation, your views on this?
Sorry, I just lost your voice.
Could you tell us, can you hear me, sir? Can you hear me? Right, so the question was, can you tell us your views about AI regulation and governance?
I think AI, like the topic today, it's quite like a tool, like in the technical domain. So, as a tool itself, we can use the tool to do good things, and we can use the tool to do bad things.
Oui, alors est-ce que vous pouvez peut-être nous en dire un peu plus? On parlait du débat.
Could you tell us a bit more? We mentioned the debate about facial recognition in China and whether it could be accepted by the population because it's a form of control by machines, credit rating of the Chinese population. That's a social credit system. It was used during the health crisis. So it begs the question, in Western democracies, could we adapt or not that type of technology? The question of propriety of data by governments is a matter for debate here. What are your views on this? Yes, the question was, there's been a lot of controversy about facial recognition used in China, so that is not necessarily adaptable to Western democracies. So what are your views on the possibility of, for example, making sure that data, if it's if governments own data, question of governance and regulation?
So I think, first of all, facial recognition, like fingerprint recognition and other recognition technologies, it's only a subdomain of AI, which basically you give the computer a face. The computer algorithms trying to extract certain salient points and using the features around those points to be able to distinguish different person. So that's the whole idea about facial recognition. It's just like fingerprint recognition. So the hypothesis here is like for each individual person, you will have you will have a unique facial expression in terms of numeric values. So by using that numeric, the vector of number, basically, you'll be able to, the computer be able to distinguish you from the other person. So that's the whole idea. And facial recognition can definitely like be very strong and helpful in certain domains. So like before we use fingerprints to do a lot of identity recognition tasks, but now we can use face to do the similar thing. And yes, facial recognition, face data, or like other biometric data that the computer can use to do certain inferences and analysis. Essentially, they are data, and they are somehow related to person's privacy because it's face, right? So not all the people like their face to be used. So I think definitely for the companies who use data to provide applications in our daily lives or in our working environment, the use of those data, first of all, it needs to be very transparent. And if it's not transparent enough in those countries, regions, the government need to make certain regulations or policies, for these companies to use this data in the right way, not in the bad way or the wrong way. And also the person who being collected, the face data being collected, I think they do have the right to, first of all, they need to agree with this use of the facial data, which I think most of 99% or even above that number of the applications here. The first step, like the users or customers using those mobile apps or other apps, they need to first sign an agreement and that saying, okay, I'm okay with like your application using my face. I'm willing to use my face as a identification method for the application to recognize me. That's the first step. So it needs to be very transparent. And the second, the protection and the safe, the length of saving those facial data is also important. So those companies who use those data like need to save those facial data in the right way, and they need to protect those data, and they need to delete those data if the customer don't want their personal information stay in the database. So all these details, all these steps, if we don't have regulations or policies, the companies will do it on their own, based on their own opinions. So I think it will be a mess somehow. But if we have regulations, policies made by authorities or governments, and if all the companies follow the rules, follow the regulations, I think it will have the technique itself, facial recognition, can create a lot of benefits and convenience to either the users or consumers or customers who use those apps, basically. So that's my comments on this. Thank you.
Merci.
Many thanks, Mr. Feng. Maybe we can come back here to the studio. We've talked about data security. You talked about the GDPR. So there's a regulation that Europe is working on that is becoming to be applied elsewhere gradually. Have we gone too far? How far do we want to go? Is there not a risk if we regulate too much that we hinder progress in AI? In this discussion on the role of technology and how to keep control over it, there are tensions. On GDPR, there are 2 points. There's the capacity to secure the data, make sure it's safe, and keep on the European scale. So there's a question of data sovereignty. That is probably a good thing, a very good thing. And the second point, the second use for it is to protect private citizens through the data they entrust us with. Having said that, we see clearly that the debate is quite new and we are quite immature when it comes to that debate. And when we find it difficult to explain to our citizens that an app such as Stop COVID could help contain pandemics, we find it difficult to explain that to citizens because it is subjective, and we get a feeling that we're going to be tracked by, not by a dark force, that's not what I mean, but by the state. So we're going to have to work towards a certain maturity so as to have a more serene discussion. And we might find it difficult to use data that would make it possible for our algorithms and machines to become more powerful. And that's the risk in France compared to other countries. Because they have a different democratic organization or a different regulation, can free themselves from those resistance. We have in France a data protection agency, and with everything to do with health-related data, we need to become more matured so as to have a more serene debate and move forward. But that's also true of the fields of justice or administration. We could move a lot faster, but as long as we haven't sorted out that debate, our citizens will be reluctant. And it's the same with the possibility of a digital ID, the possibility for people to accept that digital ID. And the state will try and find a trusted third party to actually come out of that blockage. So who could be that trusted third party?
Exemple de la crise sanitaire.
If we take the example of the health crisis, if you want to restart the economy, air transport, for example, well, clearly we'll need the new technologies, and within which regulatory framework could we consider that AI would help us, for example, travel back again as we used to do? Well, regulation evolves in a third-party world, regulation, competition, innovation. It's a mixture of the three. Couple of elements of truth, historical truth at the economic level. First, the leaders in technology impose their standards and regulation. You cannot impose a regulation if you don't master the technology. So in Europe, for example, we have the GDPR before we add the industrial power to do it. We shot ourselves in the foot, did we? Well, with the regulation, reinforce the diminution of major platforms. So we have to be careful about the way we are using regulation. And regulation may be cross-cutting. For example, if you take face recognition, what happened when DGPR, which constrained the facial recognition, major European technological group, delocated their research centers in zones where they could do it. And now the key players in facial recognition, let's put regulation. When you put regulation, you prevent the others from coming into the game. So we need to understand what we do. So regulation needs to be used carefully, cautiously, but first you need to have industrial ambition before talking about regulation. Of course, there is cross-cutting regulation, but there are also sector-wise regulation. We can see with digital money, central banks went into panic. Some countries saw that the use of digital money currencies, that will be one of the revolution of the coming decade, and which will completely reshuffle the existing regulations of our framework. So now, when we look at Stop COVID, doesn't work in France, but in Germany it works much better. Why does it work well? Because data is decentralized and given to Apple and Google. And in France, we give them to the states. Where's the difference? Well, do we go to industrial players or to the states? So we should really, the education, as Julia said, but of course the appropriation, but the trust in private players, it has to come from private players. It is for them to explain to the regulation authorities what goes on, and it is for the decision political players to take the decision. But there will be regulation asymmetries, and there will be a non-cooperation strategy between the major economic regional blocs. So I just want to say a word about the word regulation and about education you talked about earlier on. In French, we got two words, réglementation and regulation. In English, there is only one, which concerns the rules and regulations. So when we talk about regulation, it doesn't mean that we set rules. Regulation is public authorities through decree or law. The regulation, well, it's the implementation of this. So in France, we have to make public authorities aware to make sure that they will come up with good regulations so that we could have a proper control, in fact. So the regulation authorities cannot replace the government or public authorities. So clearly there is a nuance, linguistic nuance. Often there is a mistake between regulation and rules. The public authorities have to take their responsibilities and say, sorry, I prohibit, I authorize, and this and that. And then the lawmaker will make a decision and the regulation will be defined. So if we say in this room we shouldn't have more than 20 degrees, this is a rule, and then someone we see if we are allowed to do it or not. Yeah, it's what Matthieu COURTECUISSE says is correct, but this is correct too. For the last 10 years, the GAFAM have been influencing the law, and we are our law, and we are not in an offensive logic, but in a defensive logic. We are not up to the challenge in several stakes, and our reflex, I would say, that our first reflex is to protect ourselves. We do it at the tax level, we do it about labor law, when there is a kind of a liberalization of labor, and we do it at the penal level. So I could mention all the codes or laws where we are on a defensive attitude because we don't have our tools, we don't have the instruments, we didn't educate, we did not train our citizens, and therefore our will is to shut ourselves and to protect ourselves. We do it at the European level with the GPR, but which is is a good thing, but means that we cannot unleash the machines and the algorithm. But our first reflex is protection through the French legal framework more than through the regulator. Last point on education, which is my domain of predilection, if I may say so. You said earlier on, Matthieu, that we need to develop mathematics, insist on mathematics, of course, but we need to develop logic. And in the anti-French educative system, of course, we still a bit of mathematics, but we've removed all logic reflections. If you see, regardless of the level, even from high school, from grandes écoles, have no logic. I don't know how their brain has been formatted, but they're not logical. But in the system we're talking about, you need logic. Look at what Xavier Niel did with his School 42. It's based purely on people. He hires people who have a certain logic. Then we'll see if they do math or not. Of course, you have to do mathematics, one thing. And just as an example, I've said it often, I think today it's been done recently, but you know that in the domain of national education, you have all possible sort of PhD in music, ancient language, compared literature, whatever. You could be a professor of history, geography, chemistry. But there is one that doesn't exist, and I think, and it's all very recent, it's IT. So so we'll put the question to Luc Julia, who is still with us. Now, now to ask you, what are you working on right now? What are the new progress, the new border? What are the new frontier of that we could expect from IT science in the coming months or year? What we've discussed so far here, all of us in medicine, there will be amazing improvements because not only medical imaging is an amazing field, but everything that has to do with DNA sequencing or encoding, and we can have algorithm will provide a lot of data. So indeed, healthcare is something that will make progress. We have an aging population. We'll pay attention to what's going to happen later. So, and then transport. We talked about cars. Self-driving cars. yeah, you know, be it goods or people, well, this will be revolutionized by this and the fact that they're robots that will do most of the transport. So, and then in another domain, which is dear to me, which is that of daily life, what we call the IoT, the Internet of Objects, of things, Internet of Things, practical things, all the objects around us, and who will react and interact with us to deliver services, will look smart, but will seem smart to us because they will provide a service we want them to provide. So, small revolutions, you know, they're tools we are creating. They are different forms of artificial intelligence that will deal with very specific domains and that will make it possible to progress in very specific domains. Now, just possibly one quick word about the regulation. To me, DGPR is an amazing improvement. It's not that we had a reaction in Europe, but also we reacted, and it has an education virtue or quality. That is, some people realize that regulation is essential. So now, does it prevent innovation? I'm in favor of DGPR, and like you know, they do that in California too, and I'm for regulation because. You know, the regulation is 15 ahead of regulation. I think it's so. We say also smartphones, the future smartphones, which are already a personal PA. You know, a powerful PA will be even more powerful tomorrow, or could even have borders collapse. There will be automatic translation. There will be. They will analyze the millions of mails that we, you know, will be able to sort all 6 at a time. Is that it? Yeah, yeah. Well, that's what they're designed for. To, you know, automatic translation is really. So it doesn't work too well today, but it will come eventually. You know, as soon as there are rules and many examples, a lot of data and logic, as the speaker said early on, but artificial intelligence will be able to help us, you know, to sort mail. It's quite easy, but so all those chores, actually, you know, we do like not even thinking about them, you know, AIs will help us do that. We're getting to the end of our discussion, our hour and a half of discussion. Dominique, I looked at all the questions sent to us. Well, many have to do with employment, jobs, you know, this double question mark, you know, the idea of AI that could free a man from a difficult task or jobs and the fear that they will replace us. So how can we find a proper balance between the two? This could be possible economic question when jobs are, employment is threatened not by AI, but by a virus we were not expecting. So how can we imagine pulling out of this thanks to AI? For us, and I'm saying on behalf of a certain number of our colleagues of the Cercle economy, my worries in the coming months is the youth employment, because in our domain, AI, those who will take power and those who will move things around are the youth. And we should not leave them on the road, on the side of the road. They have to be integrated. They said that there will be 700,000 coming out of there in September. I mean, it's terrifying. It's dramatic, you know. We can't let them. We should find something better than just delivering pizzas on a bicycle, you know, or sushis. And I think that in all domains that we mentioned, and we closed with medicine, that they do now in medical studies. You need more than just physiology, pathologies, and so on. You have to put AI because they will need it, and we see doctors, and I've seen many who are lost in front of a laptop simply because they never learned how to use it properly or how to use the improvements that will come up. So this is a domain which is still to be explored. Thank you very much to all the participants. 10 o'clock, we free the studio. Thank you very much. And listen to the Rencontre d'Aix 20th anniversary. Keep going.